My son asked me a question at dinner one night that I have never been able to forget. Not because it was harsh, not because it started a fight, but because in all my 75 years, no one had ever asked me anything quite like it. And I realized, sitting there with my fork still in my hand, that I did not have an answer. My name is Robert. I am 75 years old. And what happened at that dinner table on an ordinary Tuesday evening last spring quietly dismantled and rebuilt something inside me that I had spent my entire adult life keeping carefully in place. I want to tell you about that night. But to tell you about that night, I have to go back a little. Not all the way, just far enough so that when I tell you what my son asked me, you understand why it landed the way it did. I grew up in a house where men did not discuss themselves. That is not a complaint. It is just the truth of where I came from. My father was a decent man, a hard-working man, and I loved him. But the interior life, the feelings, the doubts, the quiet fears a person carries around inside them day after day, those things were not spoken about. They were managed. You got up, you did your work, you provided, you showed up, and if something was sitting heavy on your chest at 2 in the morning, well, that was yours to deal with alone, and you dealt with it. And in the morning, you made the coffee and you went back to work. That was the model I inherited. I never questioned it. I simply absorbed it the way a child absorbs everything around him, quietly and completely. And then I carried it forward into my own life and called it strength. I married a woman named Helen when I was 28. She was patient with me in ways I did not deserve and probably did not fully recognize until much later. She knew, I think she always knew, that there were rooms inside me I kept locked, not out of secrecy exactly, but out of habit, out of the deep trained instinct that said those rooms were not meant to be entered, not even by the people who loved you most. Helen never forced anything. She would sometimes look at me in a way that made me feel seen in a way I was not entirely comfortable with, and I would change the subject or make a small joke, and she would let it go. She always let it go. And I told myself for decades that this was a kindness, her letting it go. I am no longer sure that is what it was. We had 2 children, a daughter, Claire, who lives across the country now and calls every Sunday without fail, and a son, Daniel, who stayed closer, who married a good woman, who has 2 children of his own, and who has, in the last several years, become something I did not entirely anticipate. A man who is not afraid to ask the hard question. I do not know where he got that from. It did not come from me. Daniel is 44 now. He has my build, my hands, my habit of going quiet when he is thinking hard about something. But somewhere along the way, he learned something I never did, which is that silence is not the only option. That you can sit across from someone you love and ask the thing you actually want to know, and the world will not come apart because you asked it. We had dinner at his house last spring, a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. His wife had cooked, the grandchildren had eaten earlier, and were already upstairs, and the 3 of us were sitting at the table after the meal, the way you do when no one is quite ready to move yet, and the conversation has gone soft and easy. We talked about the garden he was putting in, something about a fence his neighbor wanted to build, ordinary talk, the comfortable kind. And then there was a small pause, the natural kind that comes at the end of easy conversation. and Daniel looked at me across the table and said something that I will carry with me for whatever years I have left. He said, "Dad, are you happy? I mean, not right now, not today. I mean, in your life. Were you happy?" That was it. That was the whole question. 9 words, the second half of the last one, barely louder than the first. And he asked it the way you ask someone to pass the salt, calmly, without pressure, as if it were the most natural question in the world. And maybe for him it was. But for me, it was as if the floor had shifted slightly under my chair. I did not answer right away. I reached for my glass, and I took a sip of water, and I set it down, and I looked at my son, and I understood in that moment, with a clarity I had not expected, that I had no idea what the honest answer was. Not because my life had been terrible. It had not been terrible. I had loved and been loved. I had worked hard. I had watched my children grow into good people. I had sat with Helen in the early mornings with coffee and felt something I can only describe as gratitude. But happy, had I been happy? That was a question I had never once, in 50 years of adult life, stopped to actually ask myself. And the fact that I could not answer it immediately, that I had to search for the answer the way you search for something you have misplaced, told me something about myself that I found genuinely difficult to sit with. I said, "I think so. I think I was mostly happy." And Daniel nodded, not in a satisfied way, in a listening way. And then he said, "What does mostly mean? What can now? Antadina, what can't done?" And something cracked open. I do not know how to describe it more precisely than that. It was not dramatic. I did not cry, not right then. I just felt something give way very quietly inside me. Some old structure that had been holding a particular shape for a very long time. And I heard myself begin to talk in a way I had never talked before. Not to Daniel, not to Helen, not to anyone. About the years when I was building the business, and I was present in the house but absent in every way that mattered. About the morning when Claire was 8 and she came to my office door while I was on the phone and held up a drawing she had made, and I waved her away, not cruelly, just absently, and the look on her face when she turned and went back down the hall. I have thought about that look more times than I can count. I never told anyone that. About the feeling I carried for years, that I was always slightly behind where I was supposed to be, that there was some version of my life that was the correct version, and I was perpetually falling short of it, and how exhausting that was, and how it had sat under everything else like a low hum I had learned not to hear. Daniel sat there and he listened. He did not try to fix anything. He did not tell me I was wrong, or that I had been a good father, or that it didn't matter now. He just listened the way I should have listened to more people across more years of my life. His wife quietly excused herself at some point, and I barely noticed. And Daniel and I sat at that table and we talked for 3 hours, which is longer than I think Daniel and I had ever talked in our entire lives combined. Not about football or the grandchildren or plans, but about real things, true things. Things I had kept in those locked rooms for so long that I had half forgotten they were there. I told him about his grandfather, my father, and the silence I had inherited and never questioned. I told him about the years I had spent believing that providing was the same thing as loving, that if the mortgage was paid and the refrigerator was full and no one was sick, then I had done my job as a husband and a father, and how it took me until my 60s to begin to understand what Helen had always known, which was that presence is not the same thing as provision. That showing up in the building is not the same thing as showing up for the person. I told him I was sorry, not in a formal way, not as a speech, just sorry in the way you are sorry when you have finally seen something clearly and you understand what it costs the people around you. He told me he did not need the apology, that he had not asked the question to make me feel guilty. He had asked it, he said, because he had been thinking about his own life, about whether he was living it in a way he would be able to account for honestly one day. And he had realized he did not know the answer to that question for himself either. And he supposed he had just wanted to ask someone who had more of the picture than he did. That undid me a little. The idea that my son had come to me not to judge me or to extract a confession, but because he was genuinely looking for something, for a kind of honest reckoning between the two of us, father and son, both of us trying to understand what a life well lived actually looks like from the inside. We did not arrive at any grand conclusion that night. We did not solve anything. But something between us shifted permanently in the way that real conversations do, the rare ones, and we both felt it. And when I hugged him at the door before I drove home, I held on a few seconds longer than I usually do, and he did too. I have been thinking about that night ever since, nearly every day. Not with regret exactly, though there is some of that. More with a kind of awakened attention. I find myself noticing things differently now. The way the light comes through the kitchen window in the morning. The sound of my own breathing in the early quiet before the day starts. The conversations I have been having with Claire, longer ones now, with more room in them. I have been less afraid of the unlocked rooms. Not fearless. I am still a man who spent 7 decades learning to keep things contained. You do not undo that in a season, but less afraid, more willing to walk in and look around. I have thought a lot about what it means that I needed my son to ask me a question before I could begin to ask it of myself. There is something uncomfortable in that, in the idea that I was waiting without knowing I was waiting, that the door to that conversation was always there, and I simply never reached for the handle. But I have decided that the discomfort is worth sitting with rather than explaining away, because the discomfort is honest, and honest is what I want to be now, whatever time I have left. If you are younger than I am, and I suspect most of you are, I want to say just this one thing, and I will say it plainly because I am too old now for anything else. Ask the people you love the real questions, not the easy ones, not the ones about plans and schedules and how the job is going. The real ones. Are you happy? What are you afraid of? What do you wish had gone differently? What do you need that you have not been able to ask for? Ask them while you still have dinner tables and ordinary Tuesday evenings, and the gift of time that you do not yet understand is a gift. I know it may feel like too much, like crossing a line that polite people do not cross. I am telling you from the far side of 75 years that there is no such line. There is only time, and there is only the people in front of you, and one day, sooner than you think, one of those things will run out. And what you will wish, more than almost anything else, is that you had asked.